We'll see what you guys think is also good stuff this week, but we are going to start this week's show with Helmet. Meantime, and if I remember correctly, we have already heard in the opener Unsung, and then we're gonna hear In the Meantime.
Not the space hog in the meantime, though, right? That's a different.
No, I heard that the other night, actually.
Oh yeah,
I was putting '90s one-hit wonder soundtrack on, so
that'll be on that for sure. Yeah.
Give us the numbers, Matt.
Yeah, the Meantime by Helmet comes in at number 660 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 69 in 1992, number 3,839 of all time. It is Helmet's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Helmet is ranked number 1,459 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
This is the second album for Helmet. Strap It On was their first one. Just so you know, they later have albums called Aftertaste and Size Matters as well. So there's quite a provocative ballot. There are some other ones that are not, but just so you know, there's a couple there. And so they have 10 total albums. Their last one was 2023's Left. The members of Helmet, it's moved around quite a bit, but for this album, the constant on the band has been Page Hamilton. He's the lead guitarist and lead vocals. He is the only original member of the band who is still in the band to this day. Also on this album was Peter Mengede on rhythm guitar, John Stanier on drums, Henry Bogdan on bass, and that would be it for this album. There were lots and lots of changes. Outside of Page Hamilton, the current band, the longest tenure of the current band was someone who joined the band in 2006 for reference. So that's kind of where we're at there. Very quick sort of rundown on Helmet. They are a band from New York City. They were founded in 1989. Page Hamilton. It's another one of these bands where there's people in the band, but the constant is one person. I feel like we've covered a lot of those bands, so Page Hamilton's one of them. In their early years, Page Hamilton was in a band called Band of Susans. They'd recorded 2 albums. He was in New York studying jazz guitar at the Manhattan School of Music. He's originally from Oregon, just FYI, and sort of met most of the rest of the band in New York, but interestingly, they're all from like different places. Like the main guitarist is from Australia. The bassist is also from Oregon. There's a Floridian in the band, John Stanier. So they're all kind of from different places, but they're in New York City. Classic New York story, I think.
Melting pot.
Mm-hmm. The band name originally, Peter Mengede's then wife suggested the name Helmuth, the German name, but Page Hamilton misheard her and instead heard it as Helmet, and that's how they became Helmet. They started playing locally. Remember, they were in 1989 and got actually a record deal pretty quickly and released their debut studio album, as we mentioned before, Strap It On. It sold 40,000 copies, just enough to keep them going, and basically, Helmet was not signed by major record labels, but they are one of those bands that really benefited from Nirvana breaking through. After Nirvana broke through, they were signed, and not only were they signed, but they got a $1.2 million advance from Interscope, split between the next 3 albums they released. And the first album of that 3-album group was Meantime, which was released in 92. And certified gold in 1994. It sold over 2 million copies worldwide and is to this day their highest selling album. Pretty much shortly after this album is when some members of the band started to leave. The only other thing I'd mention on this one is that the song In the Meantime, which opens up the album, was recorded by Steve Albini. And he was the person on there, particularly in true Steve Albini fashion, having that snare drum sound that is on there. But actually, Albini, it's funny because I always think of him as hating that, and I read later he hated the snare drum sound. I'm like, wow, that's on cue right there. Um, uh, yeah, and like the thing I found funny was that he said later when he went to produce Nirvana's In Utero, he had like a clause written into his contract stating that the guy who remixed the album, Andy Wallace, would not be allowed to remix In Utero because he hated the sound of the snare drum so much
Jeez.
in the meantime by Helmet. So there you go. I think interestingly enough, Helmet opened for Faith No More on this album. Uh, and
Wow.
we covered that album last week, so that would be
Yeah.
an interesting concert, wouldn't it? This one and there, and there's lots of different genres that they are accredited to: alternative rock, indie rock, sludge metal, and they are, for some people, considered to be one of the first new metal bands as well. Is another thing that Helmet is sometimes launched in. So. Okay, a little bit of an overlap right there. Our first time covering Helmet. I think the only time we're going to cover Helmet. Let's start with Matt on this one.
Yeah, so I've heard of this band for many years. Never really knew anything except Unsung. That was on I have a huge, for like Christmas one year, my brother got me the 90s pop culture box. It's like 8 CDs. It's all music from the 90s, right? And that song was on there, so so I knew that. And so most of this was new to me, and I generally liked it. I felt that I don't know if you said hardcore anywhere in there, John, but there's definitely like a hardcore element, it seems like to me.
I didn't, but I get what you're saying. Yep.
But to me, it's a much more palatable one. Like it's a very heavy very riff heavy album.
Yes,
And the Paige Hamilton's voice is certainly, it is kind of screaming at times or like yelling, and which typically is something that could be off putting for me. But it's done in a way that's like much more palatable, I think. It's different than like a Slayer, for example, which was like a harsh, very like in your face kind of harsh, kind of sound. Pantera to a lesser extent, but similar to that I was liked a little bit more than Slayer. But I would say that, I don't know, to me, and I'm the, kind of the novice ear of harder rock, of like more metal, heavier music. This to me was, I would rather listen to this than one of those other bands, and it seemed to fit a little bit more in my wheelhouse. I think maybe that's because, sludge metal or grunge, there's a grunge kind of feel to it, although I would not call them like a grunge band, but, there's some heavier parts in here that you could definitely hear in other grunge songs or Seattle bands or whatever, which is a genre that I align with a little bit more. So it's pretty energetic. It's got some cool riffs. I like when they go a little bit staccato as well, because they'll slow down and kind of give there's almost like a bouncy feel to certain things, like maybe Turned Out, perhaps. I think maybe, or is it Give It? Maybe I'm thinking Give It, but like, and in Unsung it's like da-na-na, da-na-na. So that like start stop kind of stuff that they do, I enjoy that. And so there's some stuff that they're mixing up in here in terms of tempo. Generally though, this kind of blends together for me, that it's just, it's a very, it was hard for me to parse out certain songs for the, and so it kind of was like hit one note for the most part, with a couple of variations here and there that I was able to pick out. But I don't know, I probably listened to it about 3 or 4 times and enjoyed it every time, but I don't know if anything really stood out to me as, oh, that's the song on this album. They're all kind of that song, the song on this album to me. So I kind of knock it down a little bit just for me because of that. I'm sure maybe if I listened to it more, if I had more of an ear for it, I could pick out things a little bit more. But generally speaking, I really did like it. So I'm gonna go give this a slight thumbs up.
Yeah, I feel similar to you, Matt. I feel like the kind of the main selling point for me is their guitar riffs. They're really good. They start out really strong. All the songs really kind of get you amped up right away. They have these great riffs, and I think the rhythm section's pretty tight, with the bass and drums working in concert with the guitar. The lead singer kind of sounds like Ozzy to me, like prime Ozzy. So that always kind of throws me a little bit. but and lyrically, I didn't really pay attention, honestly, but I didn't feel like that was a strong kind of part of the album. I feel like the instruments and the sound was kind of what carried me through this. I didn't, or like you, Matt, I didn't have an issue with the screaming. It's kind of, I'll be interested to see kind of how metal evolves in the 90s here, because I think the last metal album we talked about was Pantera, and I like that album more than this one. And it's kind of, I think we've mentioned this before, but it's kind of hard to like reinvent the metal if you're kind of sticking to the base formula of what metal is. And I feel like they're doing a good job here of the genre, but there's not any sort of element that like catapults it to another level for me. I think it's pretty functional. I also was curious, they're always kind of like linked to Nirvana, or that's always mentioned in the same sentence. Were they expected to be like the next Nirvana, or is it just because Nirvana was so popular they had money to spend, or something? The label had money to spend or something? I
think it was just after Nirvana broke, a ton of bands that never would have got signed to major labels got signed. And that was, Helmet's a good example of, if they came about 2 years later, they would have absolutely never even sniffed a major label. And then, like I mentioned in the bio, then, when they came, they not only were they signed, but they got like $1.5 million in 1992 money to cut albums, because suddenly people saw like a more aggressive sound was there. So that's, I think it's less Nirvana and it's more Nirvana as an archetype for, then Nirvana came and all these bands got signed.
Yeah. So, and I don't really get the new metal sound either. I think they're kind of still harder than that. I don't feel, obviously Rage is kind of more new metal than Rage Against the Machine than this, in my opinion, as like a precursor. And I don't know. I think it's just kind of solid sounding music. Nothing raised the bar for me, so I'm gonna also give it a slight thumbs up.
Well, I actually disagree with you guys a little bit. I definitely hear the new metal in this with the start stop.
I'm not sure what new metal is, actually, so it's hard for me to say that.
I'll give you an example, right? Like songs,
I've heard it. I just don't like descriptions of
songs that I think of in the new metal. I think people immediately think of the new metal that has like a rap aspect.
Limp Bizkit. That's what I
But
I think of like Korn and.
But I think I think of like start stop riffs and so a good example is this if we go off the idea, this walked so this other could run, right? A song like Down with the Sickness by Disturbed. This shares elements of it sonically. That song like get up and get down with the, it's like the riff is like like that's where I feel like it is. It's sort of that like start stop riff that's sort of aggressive, uncompromising, but also not triple guitar attack. They're not really varying it. It's even when you think of a band like Korn, it's kind of, there's elements of that, pushed back, sludgier sound where it's like, let's take a little bit of what, Helmet and the Melvins did, but let's make it the most rudimentary version of that sound. I hear tons of new metal in this.
Well, here's what it says.
Hardcore, I hear hardcore too.
Yes, yeah, and this says it combines elements of heavy metal with other genres such as hip-hop, alternative rock, funk, industrial, and grunge. It rarely features guitar solos or other displays of musical technique. It's heavily syncopated and based on guitar riffs.
It's to hit you over the head, basically.
So based on that description, I hear that the syncopation, and yes, I
remember my musician friend said it's dumb fuck rock is basically a good way to put it, and that's like basically a perfect way to put it, because I've always liked this album and Helmet, but I think it's funny because I might be listening to this, Matt, a little bit more like you do, in that to me Helmet's a vibe, and it was probably the perfect week for me to hear it because I kind of was just angry over the weekend about something I won't get into, but I'm rarely an angry person, but I was just carrying a little bit of anger with me. I put this album on, and boy, this album met me where my anger was. I felt great after fucking listening. And it's just, I didn't want anything more than just hit you over the fucking head riffs, and that's what this is. Obviously, Unsung is the famous one. But there's huge riffs all over this stuff. Like Turned Out is another one that just comes on like that, and you're just thunders in your headphones and sounds great loud. And to me, sometimes I don't need more than that out of a certain genre of music. And for me, Helmet is a very good type of music that when I need to meet my anger with something or an aggressive feeling, it's great to put in and just have it, as I said before, meet my anger. And so I'm not going to have sort of the nuanced take on this. I'm not going to draw the comparisons like I sometimes often do, weaving in. I mean, certainly, Matt, you're right. There's some legacy with what, hardcore was doing. There's definitely sounds of that. And, to me, the lineage of this later will be the new metal. So that's kind of where it meets in between. But I think the number one thing I'll say for this album is, and this might sound like an insult, but for me it's kind of a strength. It's the type of album that if you need to go, attack a punching bag, or you need to, blow off some steam, or you need to just, pound like your hand into the dashboard as you're singing, or just sit in a bed and like let aggressive, you know what I mean? Sometimes you don't even have to move to have it meet you, and just put the headphones on. It's a great headphones album. It's loud. Like if you look at Helmet play live during this period, they're just loud as hell. It's just like, it's just an explosively loud sound. And sometimes I just want my music turned up to 11 on the 10 dial and grind through, and the riffs speak to me on this album. Yeah. So I agree, it's a little samey. But once again, when you're hearing something as more of a vibe, the tracks, the tracks, it's just a series of guitar riffs, and it almost becomes like a larger piece for me that just has different guitar solos in the same piece. The lyrics sort of blend into the bigger picture. So I would say a slight recommendation for me, just because of the feeling it evokes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
no,
fair.
that makes sense. It's if you're trying to go for, and that's what a lot of like heavier music is. It's kind of like this, get the aggression out. That's what you watch the videos of people at hardcore shows and the mosh pits and the pushing, like the aggression. It's getting out that kind of energy. And if you have that and you want to get that out, you don't need variation of that. You just want some kick-ass riffs, and and that's what you get here. So that makes sense. I agree.
And they're like hardcore too, because the dudes just wear the most generic clothes ever. There's no edgelord at all to these guys. If you look at pictures of them, they're just like t-shirts and jeans.
They look like regular people. There's no like image or
it's like they walked in from like the most generic stuff you had. Somebody just handed them the instruments and were like, play as loud as you fucking can.
Like they won a contest on a cruise ship or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
We joked around. We showed the Beavis and Butthead video this week where they said much the same thing. But I think even if Beavis and Butthead hadn't led me there, we're like, they sound like they look like normal people. I think that's always been a part of what Helmet's aesthetic is to me. They're just these guys, right? That just grab guitars, play really loud, and then go back to whatever it is. But that's like what hardcore is to some degree. Yeah. You have these guys, and Henry Rollins, wears t-shirts and jeans. He may be jacked up, but everybody around him's kind of just there. And then you don't really know what they do outside of it, but they're really freaking aggressive. While
Wikipedia is calling this post-hardcore.
I think the only post is the fact that it's like a couple years after hardcore had its peak. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. This is a good album to lift to, which is kind of akin to what John was saying about anger and stuff. But
well, and then later, like new metal would famously be like super aggro, right? And this is like aggro, but not in like a way. Like later, I think it kind of became, new metal became a little bit toxic because there was a lot of like violence at the concerts. The blending with hip hop sort of lent itself to be kind of like appropriation. None of that like hip hop lineage of new metal is in this. But I've never processed, new metal can also, what another band that owes a lot to this is? It's like Papa Roach, like that Last Resort song.
God,
that's new metal as well. And that's, you hate that song, you said?
Yeah.
Oh, I fucking love that song. So we'll talk about that later in the thing. But it's that same sort of thing, just a crunchy guitar riff and just pure. I would say it's like pure like aggro, but that sometimes sounds like it's a walking boner, and this isn't like a sexual, aggro. It's more just a like, I want to just punch something. It may not have to be a person, but something manifests in my anger. So So what would you guys say in the middle for you? Slight thumbs up?
I think slight thumbs up.
Yeah, we both said slight thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're all there. Slight thumbs up pretty much.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,